Larry, I really appreciate the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of UCLA. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Al Osborne. I'm a professor at the Anderson Graduate School of Management, and I've had any number of dean capacities in that environment. But today, I'm here because of the University of California fully recognizes its small role in supporting C.Z. Wilson and Thad Stratton and some of the other founders of the Caucus of Black Economists. I remember correctly, C.Z. and Thad, that folks gathered around your office also, and there's several of you here, to really get this thing started. And for me, being a young economist at the time, I am almost as old as these guys now. It was just an incredible experience to see the energy that they promoted. And so on behalf of the Chancellor at UCLA, I was able to support a page here recognizing C.Z. Wilson for his efforts and congratulating the NEA for 50 years of accomplishment. This is remarkable, and we hope to see another 50 years. Larry, back to you.
Hello, I'm Joseph Guzman. I am the director of the Economic Policy Institute at Northern Arizona University, and one of the co-founders of ASH. And it's truly a pleasure to be here with you today and an honor to be able to address this group. ASH was founded and first convened 18 years ago at the meeting of the AEA in Philadelphia. In those 18 years, ASH members have flourished, ASH has grown. Our first elected president is now president of San Diego State University here in town. That's Adela de la Torre. Our second elected president, Mark Lopez, is one of the world's most renowned experts on international migration flows, and he is a prominent media voice for the Pew Research Foundation. And I could go on, but my point is not to brag about ASH. My point is to brag about you. Because 18 years ago, when we were forming ASH, the NEA was the first economist organization to offer material support. And I want to give you a hand for that, all of you. You welcomed us as brothers and sisters to your session, your receptions, and you welcomed us to participate in your sessions, and you even gave us one of your sessions to control and manage as our own. I don't think ASH would exist without your help. And so thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And it leads me to look at the future. I think that we have some grand opportunities as an organization working together, and will be twice as effective than working apart. We've always worked together. But I think those grand opportunities fall into three categories. One is economic integrity. The world faces unprecedented challenges. The leaders and decision makers are really looking for unadulterated advice, clear guidance, and we can step in to fill that void. ASH and NEA and ASH together. The second is advocacy. What a beautiful model of advocacy that the NEA established by supporting ASH. As we move to a country of being a majority of minorities, that's the advocacy that will matter the most, is advocating for others. Advocating for each other, advocating for others over ourselves. And the third is thought leadership. I think you've set a tremendous example of including the unincluded, of considering the unconsidered, and we need to continue to pursue that in the future. And together we'll do a much better job of that than alone. I see unprecedented opportunities for the future, and I want to let you know on behalf of every ASH member that we will be with you every step of the way. Thank you, NEA, and congratulations on 50 years.
On behalf of President Wayne A.I. Frederick, and the Board of Trustees, we want to congratulate the National Economic Association on their 50th anniversary. It has been a love affair from the beginning with Howard University and the National Economic Association, as we have two members of our faculty who was one of the original founders, Frank Davis and Cleveland A. Chandler, who was my chairman when I was at Howard University. So that's been a while ago. But we want you to congratulate you. We want you, I know it's 50 years, but 50 more years of greater success. Thank you.
I am honored to be able to introduce our speaker for this occasion, Dr. Margaret Simms. It's hard to discuss the NEA without talking about Margaret. As I was sitting there at the table and talking with Mrs. Alexis, she said, "Oh, she was always so hardworking and had such spirit." I said, "Absolutely. You know, she has been so special for NEA." Now, her career, it's hard to believe that one person would have been able to accomplish so much. She started in the academy at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and then went on to the Atlanta University Center, working at Atlanta University, and as an adjunct at Clark College. And I met Margaret, particularly as in that role. She worked for the government, working for HUD, and then went on with think tanks, Urban Institute, the Joint Center, and then again back at the Urban Institute. She's had tremendous success, publishing over 70 different articles and working papers, etc. She's had board memberships, various committees, consultations, was the only woman, if I remember this correctly, with the Black Enterprise Board of Economists. She's had all kinds of honors. But as she's done these various things, she has studied social policy, economic education, racial and gender inequality, youth training programs, economic education, adolescent fertility, and minority business development. All of these topics very consistent with the mission and goals of the National Economic Association. Now, her project, her work with NEA has clearly been unpaid labor for which she has had such a serious commitment and devotion. She's been a member of the it wasn't the National Economic Association. She's been was a member of the Caucus of Black Economists in 1971. Thus, she's had 49 years of uninterrupted membership in this organization. She served on the board of directors for 19 years, as president-elect, and as chair, and as president or chair. I don't remember which it was called in the year that she did this. However, she was the longest-serving president because we changed the date for the for the official year. So she had 4 months of one year, and then she had a full year the following. So she had 16 months. I don't know if that was good or bad for her, but we sure appreciated it. Okay, Margaret also, I think her contribution to the review of Black political economy is so important. She's been on the advisory board consistently since 1977. That is 43 years. And 5 of those years in which she served, she was editor, and she went back to become co-editor for the last 2 years. Now, contribution she's made has been more than just titles. She has served and advised when she was not on the board. When she was not on the board of NEA, when she was, anyone who was president knew if they ever needed to know and what happened when, or if they needed a recommendation on what we should do now, the call went out to Margaret Simms. She's recruited economists for all kinds of various tasks because she was kind of the voice of the African American economic community, and folks knew she knew everybody. As she walked around through the halls, you know, if there's one person, you know Margaret. She became chair-elect for the NEA 5 years after she joined the board. And that was really quite an honor because at that point, being a young economist, it was meant that her efforts, her ability to serve, her ability to lead was recognized very quickly. She had increased visibility and reputation, not only among Black economists or Hispanic economists, but in the general community, serving a long term with C-SWEP, the Women's Economics Caucus of sorts. And she's had all kinds of things that she's done. The length, commitment, and consistency of service that she has given to this organization is sufficiently appropriate to have her address us at this golden anniversary celebration. And I think we welcome Dr. Margaret Simms.
Let me begin by saying how happy I am to see so many people of color in the room today. And it's especially good to have people who have served the organization throughout the 50 years we have been in existence. And we're very fortunate in having some from the very beginning with us. But it's also great to have the most recent generations of Black economists with us as well. The days when Marcus Alexis and Carl Gregory fell into each other's arms because they were so excited to see another Black economist at the annual meeting are hopefully behind us for good. This turnout is a tribute to the hard work of the planning committee who wrote, emailed, and called people to get them here today, and to see how many people from all the different eras of the organization is just a tribute and a testament to how much work they put into it. The task I was given was to summarize the history of the National Economic Association and to offer some suggestions for how we move forward to solidify the gains that we have made. The Caucus of Black Economists was incorporated in California in November 1971, but it was born in a Hilton hotel room in New York City in December 1969. The origin story, as told by C.Z. Wilson, Bernard Anderson, and others who were in the room, is that the movement, and it was a movement, was sparked by a session on increasing the supply of Black economists chaired by Phyllis Wallace that took place on Sunday, December 28th at 8 a.m. Always signing us that 8 o'clock hour, you know. According to Bob Brown's report in the first issue of the Review of Black Political Economy, 65 Black economists were in attendance at the meeting, and most attended that opening session. To quote his report, most of those present were meeting one another for the first time, and it was an inspiring experience for those who were present. The session generated a series of meetings over the course of the conference, including the infamous one in, what was that hotel room number, Bernie? 1423. I'm sure there should be a plaque there. Before they left New York, the core group agreed that the most appropriate way to move forward was to form a steering committee to provide continuity to their efforts both within the AEA and outside the organization. The committee was chaired by Marcus Alexis. Other officers included Thaddeus Bratlin, Flournoy Coles, Robert Vowell, and Robert Brown. The caucus began reaching out to graduate students almost immediately, urging people to join the caucus and apply for some limited fellowship funds that became available. For those of us in graduate school at the time, these men, and they were almost all men at that point, they became the mentors many of us did not have in graduate school, encouraging us in our research, even if the topics did not conform to the expectations of the powers that be in the profession. They also provided advice and recommended us for opportunities within the larger profession. The caucus spent a considerable amount of time the first year debating whether to work within the American Economic Association framework or set up a separate organization. Crucial to that decision was the AEA response to the caucus's statement of concern to the organization about the gross underrepresentation of Black economists in the life of the association and the profession. The way to rectify this problem, they asserted, was to address professional bias that affected how issues were approached and the types of research that were considered appropriate and valued. The solution to the problem seemed clear to those who had signed the statement. It was necessary to have greater engagement of African American economists within the profession and within the organization. That led to the establishment of the Committee on Increasing the Supply of Black Economists, chaired at that time by Andrew Brimmer, and the endorsement of a proposal to establish a summer program to prepare minority undergraduate students for graduate study in economics. However, the AEA rejected proposals for Black economists to become more engaged in the governance of the organization. Specifically, the caucus had asked that an associate secretary position be established, which would be responsible for directing activities designed to improve the status of Black and other ethnic minority groups in the profession. Also dismissed was the creation of a special fund for commissioning papers and studies by Black economists to review the literature in areas of special interest, as was the request to allow the Black caucus to select representatives for editorial boards of AEA publications. In his 1985 History of the American Economic Association and the Economics Profession, A.W. Coates describes the period of the 1960s as one in which three distinct special interest groups made their presence felt: radicals, Blacks or minority group economists, and women. He then recounts the actions taken by the three groups to achieve greater recognition and inclusion, suggesting that unlike the radicals, who wanted no truck with the national organization, and the women, who adopted a scholarly and scientific approach to their task, the Black economists felt that their position could be ameliorated only by working gradually from the ground up through the existing system rather than against it. But we know better. The caucus chose to work both within and outside the AEA. While caucus members were busy building their organization, they remained engaged with the AEA around the critical issues of training new scholars and providing opportunities for them to present their research findings at the annual meetings. Marcus Alexis, with support from the Rockefeller Foundation, launched the AEA summer program for undergraduate students that remains a mainstay in developing young scholars. Members of the NEA remain contributors to the committee and are also engaged in the extensions of the summer program, including the Pipeline Project. Although the AEA did not allow the caucus to officially name individuals to these important committees, through referrals and nominations, members of the caucus became members of several committees that were important for advancing the interests of Blacks and other people of color. Along with our counterparts in ASH, we have had consistent representation on the Committee on the Status of Minority Groups in the Economics Professions, Committee on the Status of Women in the Economics Profession, and other relevant committees, as well as on the Executive Committee of the Association. Now, it was no accident that Congressman Augustus Hawkins was at the 1969 meeting in the infamous Hilton Hotel room, because the members of the caucus were very interested in examining real-world policies on African Americans, Africa, and other parts of the African diaspora. The statement of concern explicitly called out the profession for failing to engage on these issues, for remaining silent on the crucial questions and decisions regarding resource utilization affecting minorities, and using professionalism and academic detachment as shields for barring meaningful responses to urgent social problems. The failure to highlight these issues through the AEA journals and other valued publications was documented in a Journal of Economic Literature article by Andrew Bremer and Harriet Harper in 1970. The lack of interest in policy and policy engagement within the mainstream profession did not inhibit members of the caucus. Marcus Alexis was an advisor to Jesse Jackson at Operation Breadbasket. C.Z. Wilson and Carl Gregory were involved in local community development projects in Los Angeles and Detroit, respectively. And Bob Vowell made sure I was engaged in community activities and policy discussions in Atlanta when he was my boss at Atlanta University. But the caucus remained somewhat ambivalent about the role of the caucus as an organization on policy issues. The steering committee clearly wanted to promote policy research backed by data and rigorous analysis, and they used grant funds to support some of the research being conducted by young scholars. But they were not sure about how much the organization itself should be engaged in endorsing specific policies or working closely with policy advocacy organizations or political entities and candidates. In 1974, the Committee on Goals and Objectives of the Caucus, which recommended the name of the organization be changed to the National Economic Association, also recommended that given limited resources, the organization not engage directly in policy analysis or positions. Instead, it should focus its attention on increasing the supply of Black economists and helping them advance within the profession. However, they did suggest that leadership engage on issues that affect the Black population and where the views of Black economists could make a contribution. This separation has remained a part of the organization's philosophy and reflects the concept of the NEA as an organization that welcomes African American economists and others who support the goals of the organization, regardless of their political views and policy positions. Now, in the early years, we did not have the communication options available today. So we used a number of strategies to keep in touch with members and prospective members, strategies that are considered somewhat obsolete today. The NEA president sent out periodic newsletters, the kind you actually have to print or run off copies of and put in the U.S. mail. They featured everything from fiery policy articles by NEA members to notices of births and weddings, and sadly also deaths. Among the announcements I found as I read some of the old issues were the births of Barbara Jones's youngest, Bomani, and Sandy Darity's sons. Now, written brochures were handed out at meetings and sent through the mail to solicit members and nudge lapsed members into renewing. And if you paid for a membership, you actually got a hard copy membership card by return mail. Now, if you didn't respond to the mail solicitation, you had the opportunity to come forward with your cash or check at the annual membership meeting. Now, people actually carried around checkbooks in those days because you needed that to pay for things when you didn't have cash. Membership dues in 1974 were only $10, $5 for student members. Now, in between annual ASSA meetings, the board and various committees met in locations that were convenient because of other business that took people there, or because grant funds supported research activities where a business meeting could be added to the agenda. Atlanta, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. were frequent meeting places. All of this worked because people were able to engage the resources of their home institutions to support officers and host meetings. UCLA, where C.Z. Wilson and Thad Spratlin were on the faculty, provided the platform from which the NEA could be launched. And an early grant from the Ford Foundation made through UCLA helped by supporting graduate student research and covering some of the staff expenses. The Atlanta University Center nurtured and sustained the organization through the rest of the decade of the 1970s, and Howard University, strong in the House today, has provided the largest number of NEA presidents. There were several important milestones along the way. The establishment of the Samuel Z. Westerfield Award in 1973 during Carl Gregory's tenure. It marked the caucus's determination to evaluate, elevate, and celebrate the premier black scholars in the profession on our own terms. One of our coups was the conferral of the award on Sir W. Arthur Lewis before he was recognized by the Nobel Committee. In 1976, Bob Brown approached the NEA to say he was going to have to close Black Economic Research Center, where he had launched the Review of Black Political Economy. He did not want to let the journal die just because Burke was no longer able to sustain it, and hoped the NEA could take it over. It was a bittersweet transition. We were sorry to see Burke close, but were excited by the prospect of owning the publication and grateful to the Atlanta University Center for agreeing to provide a home for the journal. However, it would not have been possible to keep it going through that transition period if it were not for the dedication of Lloyd Hogan and his trusty assistant editor, Barbara Jones. Lloyd, who passed in October, was the editor who shaped and nurtured the journal as it moved from an idea to an established publication. 50 years after its first publication, the NEA is getting great support in its new home at Sage Publications. Now, while the NEA has accomplished a great deal, there are a number of aspirations that remain unfulfilled. One is a high school outreach initiative. The first mention of this idea was found in Vincent McDonald's goals for his presidential year in 1980. College chapters is also a recurrent theme. They were mentioned in business meeting minutes as far back as 1988 and had been recommended in the goals report. Now, regional meetings, usually campus-based, were built into the origin of the organization. For the most part, these have either not been launched or not sustained. The fact that all three strategies return to the agenda periodically and are currently under discussion are proof that they can still play an important role in strengthening the organization. Now, what lessons have we learned? One, building and sustaining an organization requires energy and some degree of sacrifice. As economists, we know about trade-offs. There is only so much time in a given day, week, or year. The NEA is not an organization where a board or officer position is merely honorary. There is no permanent staff to keep the organization running while we attend to other things. If the organization is to thrive over the next 50 years, it has to be people's priority, at least for 1 year of their professional life. 2, personal communication is important, and face-to-face meetings create bonds. We live in a world where electronic communication, websites, and e-blasts make it possible to keep in touch and disseminate information with an ease that we never could have imagined 50 years ago. But in order to make people understand that being a paid member of an organization is important, we need to make them feel important. So personal outreach to members is needed to make them see that they benefit from being a part of the National Economic Association. Use electronic power to speak directly to your members in ways that you don't communicate with the entire world out there. Everyone, but especially economists, want to receive value for their time and money invested. Make membership worth it to them. Before I close, I would like to thank the 5 founders in the room: C.Z. Wilson, Carl Gregory, Thad Spratlin, Dick America, and Bernie Anderson. I'm not done. as well as Marcus, Alexis, and Bob Vowell, who are no longer with us. And I want to thank them for supporting me, promoting my work, and prodding me to serve on various NEA and AEA boards and committees. But more importantly, I want to thank them for showing me that when you are a small group within a largely white and male profession, it is not enough to take advantage of the opportunities that are presented. You have an obligation to pass on the advice, wisdom, and support to those who come behind. It is a lesson that I hope everyone in the room will incorporate into their mode of operation as they advance in their careers. Thank you.
Well, let me begin by thanking 2 minutes is not enough for me to say my name. But let me, I don't know that I'll respond to those two questions because I prepared some notes, but I want to congratulate the Planning Committee, Margaret Simms, Sue Stockley, and others with whom we communicated over the last few months for organizing this anniversary of this organization. Let me say that the NEA was founded to address the challenge of race in the economics profession. Some progress has been made over the past half century in addressing the problem, but I don't have to tell anyone in this room that far more remains to be done. I won't go into the experience that we had. I remember that day on Sunday morning after the Phyllis Wallace session when C.Z. Wilson seized the microphone and he announced that following that session there would be a meeting in his room 1423 of the New York Hilton Hotel on Avenue of the Americas to consider the organization of an organization to address the issue of race in the economics profession. And I will say that although the progress has been made, we have an obligation to put our shoulder to the wheel and to continue to address this. Now, I'm encouraged by the recent acknowledgement by the American Economic Association that this issue is a critical issue. There was a session yesterday on this topic, and the American Economic Association has undertaken some measures to move forward. But we have an obligation to continue to address the challenge of race in the American economic profession. The challenge is great, but the responsibility is clear. I am thrilled to see the number of participants in the summer program. Let me say unabashedly that when I was director of the Rockefeller Foundation Division of Social Sciences, Alexis came to me with the notion of a summer institute. I'll just end by saying this. That proposal, which Marcus and I crafted for $300,000 grant to support that program, was not easily accepted by the Rockefeller Foundation board. What we did was use the board members who were African Americans on that board. When you're in a position and you have a little power and influence, I have always been committed to use these positions to advance the race. And so, in order to craft a proposal that would be accepted by the Board of Trustees, and at that time, the board had to approve every grant of valued more than $50,000. I went to Clifton Wharton Jr., vice chairman of the board, spoke to him about the proposal. I then went to Vernon Jordan, another member of the board, told him about what we wanted to do. I then spoke to Father Theodore Hesburgh, chairman of the Rockefeller board, told him what we wanted to do, and following the advice of those three men and speaking to my former professor and mentor, Andrew F. Brimmer, we came up with a proposal that passed unanimously when it was presented to the Board of Trustees. That was the first major support for the Summer Institute, which continues to this day. So I would congratulate you, those of you who have been working in this organization, keep your foot on the pedal. Put the pedal to the metal. Don't give up. The challenge is great, but the responsibility is clear. To continue to work to address race in the American economic profession. The challenge is great, the responsibility is clear, we can do it, we will do it. I won't be around the next 50 years, but you will be here, and this organization will continue to have a great impact on the opportunities for black people in this country to advance and to become a part, make America what America should be. The hell with this business about make America great again. Make America what America should be. The hell with it.
I thought Margaret's captured our legacy magnificently. That review of our first 50 years was very accurate. I wonder, though, what the rate of progress is going to be over the next 50 years, and that's in your hands. I am really glad to be recognized as one of the founders with the other 6. 2 of them are not here, Marcus, Alexis, and Robert Brown. They played a major role. Robert and I were involved in a lot of things, in performing a sort of community contributions, community building. I'd like to tell you about a couple of these. In 1969, a group of activists, CORE, SNCC, and a lot of academicians around the country had a conference in Detroit, the Black Economic Development Conference. And the conference was taken over by some civil rights activists. but it had a report of its recommendations that were really forced upon the group by James Foreman, who was active with SNCC, and some other activists and so on. That one, the document that came out of that was called the Black Economic Manifesto. It had a lot of recommendations, really demands, which the group proceeded to try to get enacted. Two of those involved this organization and some of its founders. One recommendation is that there needed to be a black research agency that reviewed economic issues, policy issues relevant to our organization, and had a journal. One of our members, our deceased member, one of the two deceased members, Robert S. Brown, took that on. He then organized the Black Economic Research Center in Harlem, and then began to produce the Review of Black Political Economy, which carried out that recommendation. Another element of the report was that, this is the review of the first issue of the Black Economic, of the Review of Black Political Economy that Robert Brown implemented based upon the recommendation of the Black Economic Manifesto. Incidentally, it has an article that came out of the Harvard Business Review that What You People Want, that was written by our own Dick America here. And there's a review article here on the Black Economic Manifesto. But one of the second recommendations of the Black Economic Manifesto was that came out of the research that Robert Brown and the Black Economic Research Center did on the huge loss of black-owned land that because of all sorts of shenanigans and public policy, particularly in the South. And the recommendation was that we do something about it. And there was an organization that Bob Brown sort of developed. And it saved some of that loss from happening that penalized black farmers. But as our presentation today showed, that loss continues. We need to do something more about that. But that's not this organization. That's for the civil rights organization. Now, with regard to Marcus Alexis, we were quite close. And in fact, those 10 years were the most productive in my professional life because of the interaction of the large group of scholarly, dedicated, community-oriented, research-oriented group that initially formed this organization. Marcus and I responded to a lot of community requests, one of which was Jesse Jackson wanted to come up with a major document on what to do about education, employment, poverty, and so on. So he asked Marcus, whom he knew well because Marcus is from Northwestern, Jesse's from Chicago, and we did a report called the Economic Bill of Rights, and that covered a lot of policy recommendations in several important areas. And Marcus at that time was on the board of directors of the Chicago Fed, that's the 7th district of the Federal Reserve system. And I was in the board of the Detroit branch of the Federal Reserve Bank. And we would, the Detroit branch would meet with the Chicago Fed board. And Mark was chairman of that at the time. And he used to give these outstanding reports on what's going on in the Chicago region. But this is all, but I summarized this to say, though I agree with the policy that Margaret reported on of focusing upon the academic side of the economic profession, but through our members, though, let's include in our legacy the actions of our individual members in performing community services in their communities across the country and across the nation. Had I had more time, I'd talk about 2 trips to Africa that involve some of us, but I don't have the time. My time is out, and I appreciate you letting me go over it. Thank you.
Institution building. We are ourselves an institution now, but we have the opportunity, some leverage, and if we have the vision and the energy and some resources, we can build other institutions, and one of them would be a think tank, which you mentioned. You asked for some suggestions for the future. Here are 3, and these have been on the table for years. It might be time to realize them. We talked about a Marcus Alexis Institute or Center to focus on some of the issues, transportation, financial regulation, that were dear to his heart. Wow. Marcus is with us. The second is the HBCU economics departments. Most of the HBCUs do not have formal economics departments. We have the opportunity, if all the stars align, to strengthen economics teaching at the undergraduate level at up to 100 HBCUs, something that could be a real legacy. And the journal is an excellent journal, but we always, I think Bob Brown's vision was policy impact, and that the journal or something else, a blog or a newsletter, some other publication that would matter in the policy debate. On behalf of 45 million African Americans and 800 million in Africa, where I do a lot of work, and in the Caribbean, the diaspora, in other words, close to 1 billion folks. We are an organization that can make more of a difference for all of them for the next 50 years. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and I will try to stay within the time limit, but that reaches a point where you to have only 2 minutes to do 3 things is really quite a challenge. But what I want to do is to say thanks, to express to both Marcus and CZ the personal aspect of the role of how the Caucus of Black Economists enhanced my career, and then to reflect on what it is that that remains as the big challenge. The first thank you would be to the organization and leadership of the NEA, because as a result of your taking all of these issues to the next level, it gives the foundation for the continuation of all of the wonderful expressions of developing black economists. The personal aspect of appreciation, I would single out Marcus and CZ for 2 reasons. First of all, back then, CZ was vice chancellor of at the UCLA, and remember now we're talking 1960s, but it was a chancellor. He had the budget, and that was really important. But more important, he had a budget for faculty development, and it was out of faculty development program that CZ really was funded, and he had the ear of Chancellor Young. And those of you who understand how university systems work, that granted whatever skill you have, that it's fundamentally important for you to have individuals who make decisions about resources and budgets. And I was able, coming out of my life at a place called Western Washington University, to make the transition to University of California And then the rest is history. Here we are. But if it hadn't been for CZ and Marcus, who, as you know, his talents were legendary in terms of being able to function administratively, academically, intellectually, and all across a number of things. And it was through their connection with the Ford Foundation, which was mentioned, and their relationship with Peter D. Genosi, who was probably, from our standpoint, one of the best program officers that Ford Foundation ever had. But their relationship for resources that led to it's initially $125,000 grant, also would indicate that connections and who you know would be important across the train. But going back then, it was especially important to have a Northwestern University tenured professor and a vice chancellor on your team. And so what I would say the remaining kind of challenges is that you have the foundation, and it means the organization and the requirement of commitment, as Margaret was saying so well, the commitment to sustain this effort. And so the key, I would say, is to really recognize that you can't get away from the struggle, because the pipeline for producing PhD economists is still rather thin, rather small, and we need the continued efforts of the NEA to make that a possibility. Thank you.
First of all, I'm deeply honored to be here to celebrate 50 years of achievement of the NEA. In some ways, I'm lucky. Early on, I wasn't going to be much of an economist, but I got attention by economists. And how do you get attention by economists? You sit next to them. You watch what they do, and you see how they make things happen. I ran the desk calculator for Robert Eisner, Franco Modigliani. I got a postdoc. Marcus went to Harvard to get with the experts who are doing research. I went to Carnegie Mellon to see how you build a university and how you build graduate schools. And I learned very quickly when I got there that the people who are going to be great scientists, great economists, great physiologists, whatever the case might be, had to have an early start. I never had that. Coming out of Mississippi, running hard at 16, but I knew how the world operated. It operated by people exercising influence. When I got to Carnegie Mellon, my whole life was changed. I thought I was going to be writing and looking for a teaching job. I was looking for administrative jobs. So I was sent to upstate New York to help build a campus, the State University of New York at Binghamton. I learned the ropes there. I learned you had to have money, you had to have the people at the top pushing you, and you had to have ideas. That's all you needed. Because there were always scholars. It's an institution of creativity. You're going to find people who are going to keep that institution going. You have to learn how to keep it going, build it, make it happen. So I was told, essentially, that you ought to really do something to make sure that black people get an opportunity in universities. I went and recruited the very first graduate students for Carnegie Mellon. And the dean, who later became president, said, that's no problem. I said, the guy has a family, he has a home, and he's well established. That's no problem. You say, bring him in. I got the money. That was Richard's side. And we became great friends. And from there, I began to get another postdoc, which sent me to UCLA. And lucky for me, I sat between two of the greatest administrators in the system ever will be on the West Coast, Franklin Murphy and Chuck Young. Lucky. I'm there as an intern. And then the student crisis came. And they worried about how to get things done. Well, I knew how to get a few things done. And out of that, I got a pocket of resources. I got a way to work with the system. And somehow or another, out of that movement came the whole notion that we can't just stop with black people. Our students were talking about student power. We've got to change the country. And that registered with me. We have a great group of centers at the university, all started, 69. And we had a great group of graduate schools. We had professional schools who brought in some of the best minds in the country. And of course, Al Osborne, School of Business. And in the process of doing that, we learned we could work with communities. We learned we could do a lot of things. So we were well on our way to doing things when the NEA came to the door. All we needed was that challenge. And when we went to New York, I knew we had the resources. I knew we had the connections, because I knew at least 3 of the past presidents, Nobel laureates. And of course, I'd learned how to work with them in other areas. So we were not going to be turned around. This time, it was for me. It was for us. It was for my communities. It was about this day that I was thinking about. And I wasn't going to be turned around. When I went to that meeting, I said, now's the time. If we don't act now, we'll always be really enslaved with other people's ideas. It's time for us to move on. And when I said, let's meet in my room, I already had it organized. Dad knows it. We had the money. We had the resources outside the university. We had the connections. And we had my real deep love for black folks in southern states, because I grew up with cotton pickers. And I knew what the world was like. And we just went to town. We did it. And I'm deeply proud that when I go back and I think about the guys who are going before me, and the one that Margaret and I know more than anybody else is Bob Vowell. I love Bob Vowell. With nothing practically, he kept that center going. He was the dean. And he wanted to see economics, see the whole system of higher education move more toward challenging that environment to move into professional schools, build professionals, and so on. We even tried to start, with Bob Vowell's help, centers. We had a center down at in Baton Rouge. You remember that? We found a brother who had been he wasn't an economist, but he was a business major at Illinois. Say, you got to get people together, and we want you to help these people in the community in terms of building relationships, business, and development. So I'm an activist by heart, and I grew from this experience. And I'm extremely proud. With this movement, we changed the whole American Economic Association. We changed it. Now, we brought them to the table. and we demanded some things, and when I look at our list of things, it was for everybody. We didn't just talk about what is good for blacks, Latinos, Asians. We talked about a system where we could get up front with leadership and bring in other groups. And today, we're moving in that direction. Not fast enough, not by my standards, but I think we have to keep running hard, kicking butt, and move forward. Thank you.